Nazir Daf Yud begins with a Mishnah, which contains another example of someone who makes a wrong neder of Nazirus. This will be a very strange method of expressing oneself. There'll be a machogas, 3 opinions. And we'll try to explain how we're understanding what the man said and how these opinions work. There'll be a couple of different opinions of Amira. I'm explaining the Mishnah. So let's begin. The Mishnah begins with someone who says as follows: this cow says, this is what the man says, this cow says, I am a Nazir if I stand. Or he looks at the door and he says, this door says, I am a Nazir if I open. We'll explain what this means. But the 3 opinions here are, Beis Shammai, according to the Tanakama, says it's a valid Nazirus, and the person who said this is a Nazir. Beis Hillel says he's not a Nazir. Rabbi Yehuda, explaining Beis Shammai, says it's not a Nazirus, but it could be a neder, asering the cow or the door. But he has to explain it, just like we saw in our last Mishnah. He has to explain that that's what he meant. So the Gemara right away says, what does this mean? A cow doesn't talk and a door doesn't talk. So what is the logic in what he says? The cow says, the door says, what's he talking about? So Gemara says it's referring to a situation where there's a cow that is struggling to stand and a door that is locked and he's trying to get it open. And he's speaking as if he's explaining the thoughts of the cow and the door. Now, the cow doesn't have these complex thought processes and a door most definitely doesn't have them. But what the man means to say is as follows. This cow is thinking, Hashem, help me get up and stand, and if you do, I will return the favor. My people will be Nazirim and not eat my meat. So they're going to take a vow of Nazirus from meat, which of course you can't do because Nazirim aren't aser in eating meat. The same thing applies to the door. He's trying to get the door open and he says, oh, this door is saying, if you'll make me open, then people will become Nazirim. So that's what the man means to say, and by saying this, he's describing his own desire to be a Nazir if the cow will be able to stand up and the door will be able to open. So this is Rami Bar Chama's pshat. The Gemara will bring other ones. So Rami Bar Chama says that's the machogas, that's the Mishnah. Now what's the machogas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai about? It's about, can you make a Nazirus against meat? Is there, if somebody says, I'm a Nazir and I'm not going to eat meat, is that a Nazirus or not? Just like we saw in our last Mishnah, where a person makes a Nazirus against figs, does that work or not? Just like over there, Beis Shammai said it works here, he says this works. And just like Beis Hillel said there it doesn't work, here Beis Hillel says that does not work either. So Gemara asks right away, why do I need to repeat it? If we said it by figs, why do I have to say it here by meat? So the Gemara says you have to say it 2 or 3 times. You have to say it by figs, meat, and by the door. And each of them is eaten. And the Gemara quotes a few brises and a time that say Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai had to say their opinion 2 or 3 times. Rava said 2 or 3 times. Reb Chia and his brises said it 2 or 3 times. Reb Elisha and his brises said 2 or 3 times. You got to say it 2 or 3 times. Each one has a chiddush. Why? So if you've only said figs, so I would think Beis Shammai says that figs, you can make a Nazirus against figs and it works, because figs are easily confused with grapes. And a person may have thought that you can make a Nazirus against figs, or maybe that these are figs. But meat is not confused with the grapes. You may think you can't make a Nazirus against that. And if it would have only said the case of meat, so someone might think I can make a Nazirus against meat because meat is something which is served together with wine. And just like there's Nazirus against wine, I can make Nazirus against meat. But figs, which are fruits that have nothing to do with wine, you can't make Nazirus against that. And if it would have only said these 2, I would have said these 2, which are easily confused either with grapes or wine, I can make Nazirus against. But a door, there's no Nazirus. What does it have to do with anything? There's no Nazirus about that. And if I would have only said the case of the door, then I have a chiddush in Beis Hillel. I would have said only there does Beis Hillel argue and say there's no Nazirus because you can't switch out. But Beis Hillel would agree in the case of the figs or the meat that you could make a Nazirus against those. Kamash Malan, that in Beis Hillel there's a machlokes and they argue and say you can't make Nazirus against even figs or meat. Okay, so this is Rami Bar Chama's pshat. The Gemara says, according to Rami Bar Chama, the main phrase is missing in the Mishnah. The whole point of what he said about the cow is that the cow is saying, if I stand up on my own. But the Mishnah didn't say if the cow stands up on my own. The Mishnah said if the cow stands. Didn't focus on my own. So therefore, Rava says a different pshat. Now, Rava changes his pshat in the middle. So Rava's first pshat is that the cow is lying down, is trying to stand, and the person says, oh, this cow is thinking, if I would be able to stand, if somebody would stand me up, or if I'd be able to stand, whether me standing myself or somebody else making me stand, I'd be so grateful that I would be a carbon Nazir, which is his way of saying that if we can get this cow to stand, I'm makabel to bring it as a carbon Nazirus. Now, even though you can't bring a cow as a carbon stam, you could bring it as a carbon for Nazirus. Now, if somebody were to say straight out, I'm makabel on myself a carbon Nazirus, that is a valid way of being makabel Nazirus. The question here is where he just said that this cow is going to be a carbon Nazirus if it stands. Is that a valid way of saying carbon Nazirus? And that's Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai says that's a valid Nazirus, and Beis Hillel says that's not a valid Nazirus. Because to say that the cow is talking, we're supposed to figure out from that's what you mean. That's not a valid way of being makabel Nazirus. So Gemara says this pshat doesn't explain the door. This pshat explains the cow, doesn't explain the door. So therefore, Rava adjusts his pshat. Rava says slightly differently. And here you have the cow does not want to stand up. The person wants the cow to rise. And the person says, oh, this cow is thinking, you're not going to get me up. I'll be a Nazir if you get me up. And by that he means to say that the man means to say, I'm going to get that cow up. And if I don't get the cow up, I'll be makabel Nazirus, meaning to vow. He's vowing that he's really intending to make the cow rise, and he's going to pick that cow up by hook or by crook. And that's what he means to say. That's what he means to say. The cow is saying, you won't get me up. I'll be a Nazir if you get me up. He means to say that I'll be a Nazir if I won't get you up. So now, what's the machlokes? So what ended up happening was the cow stood up on its own. The guy didn't get the cow up. That's the machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai says his neder Nazirus is fulfilled because he didn't get the cow up. He said, I'm going to be a Nazir unless I get the cow up. And he didn't get it up. It got itself up. Beis Hillel says the point was that it should rise. He didn't care that he gets it up, that it gets it by itself. So that still fulfills the Nazirus. That still fulfills the vow, and therefore there is no Nazirus. Gemara now goes into two potential variations in Rava's version. In Rava's pshat, when the guy said, I'm gonna be a Nazir if I can't get her up, what type of Nazirus did he mean? He meant a normal Nazirus from wine? Or he meant a Nazirus from eating the meat of the cow? So the Gemara's first understanding is that he meant a Nazirus from wine, because why should we get into Nazirus of a cow? The pshat works perfectly fine if it's a normal Nazirus. And the whole machlokes between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is, was the Tanai fulfilled or not? So Gemara says the problem with that is then the third opinion in Mishnah Rabbi Yehuda doesn't make any sense, because what's Rabbi Yehuda saying? The guy has to explain that he meant to make a neder. Meant to make a neder. What does it have to do with Nazirus from wine? The only way that those things fit together is if he was... The other way of interpreting what he said was that he's going to aser himself from wine like the cow from a carbon. He must have used a lashon of, I'm going to aser wine on myself like a carbon meat. So that's what he meant to say. That's the only way it could make sense, that he could later explain, and Rabbi Yehuda could say, oh, he's saying he meant to make a neder asering the cow's meat. That means in the Tanakama's explanation of Beis Shammai, he wasn't saying he wants to aser the cow's meat, he was saying he wants to aser wine like cow's meat, which is a carbon. So that's the only way that we could understand it. The problem is that a person cannot make a neder of Nazirus by being matfis to a carbon. That doesn't work. And therefore, this whole pshat doesn't work. And Rabbi Yehuda, we don't understand that. So the Gemara therefore adjusts what the Nazirus is in Rava's pshat. The Gemara says the Nazirus wasn't the Nazirus of wine. The Nazirus was the Nazirus from the cow's meat. The Gemara says if the Nazirus is the Nazirus in the cow's meat, he's saying that if I can't get this cow to stand, I'll be a Nazir from its meat. So why are we explaining the machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai as to whether the Tanai is considered fulfilled if she gets up on her own? The machlokes should be, can you make a neder Nazirus on meat? We've already seen that there's a machlokes like that on figs. So why we have to give a new pshat here? So the Gemara says, no, it's not a kasha. Beis Hillel is saying, l'divrei Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel says, according to me, there's nothing to talk about because you can't make a Nazirus of meat. According to you, Beishamit, you could make a Naziris of meat. At least here, you should be masculine to me that this Naziris is no good, because in this case, the point of the man's phrase was he was trying to get the cow up. So he got the cow up. So therefore, it should be considered like it's fulfilled, and there is no Naziris. On that, Beishamai says no. First of all, I say you could make a Naziris for meat. And second of all, I say that he wanted to be the one to pick up the cow, and he didn't. Therefore, his Tanai is fulfilled, and his Naziris is Chalal.